Hi, this is Candie Langdale.
And this is Doug Langdale.
And this is, what do we call our podcast?
Cartoon Insiders.
Cartoon Insiders.
With Doug and Candie.
Yeah, that's us.
Cartooning spiders.
Yes. That's cute.
That's it.
That would be a labor saver.
Yeah, it would.
Okay.
Better. I would rather use spiders than AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, today I just thought we'd kind of go cash. I thought that since, with your years of experience,
Yeah.
you should share some of your animation writing pointers.
Pointers.
Do you have pointers, Doug?
I do.
Okay. So just things that you believe, that you go by, that your rule of thumb.
I like that we're calling them pointers rather than like hunches and pet peeves. So it sounds a lot more official.
I'm not going to ask you your pet peeves.
Well, in the world of streaming, you have very little time to grab the audience.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned that on a previous
we did.
podcast.
Yeah.
And there's just so much competition now that you have to grab the viewer immediately.
I mean, basically, you have to get the viewer's attention before they even watch your thing.
Yeah.
Like your thumbnail on the streamer, the little picture has to be engaging, the title has to be engaging. It's got to, in order to show up, it probably has to trigger some algorithm that makes them think that this person will be interested in it. And then when someone starts watching something on streaming, as we all know, it's not like you got dressed up and drove to a movie theater, but maybe picked some people up on the way and parked and paid for tickets and bought popcorn and all this stuff. And then like the movie starts and you're like, you kind of got to give it a chance.
Right.
It's not like that.
When you're on your couch in your underpants with your dog.
Yeah.
And just flipping on your clicker, as Grandma called it. The commitment level is quite low.
Yes. I do want to, as an aside, say I remember when remote controls actually made a clicking sound.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh yes.
Like ka-chunk. Not even a click. Like.
Our first remote control in my family came on our VCR.
Yeah.
And it had a cord.
Yeah.
Our remote had a cord.
Yeah, they were sort of semi-remote controls.
Yeah.
But so, if you don't grab them in like 30 seconds, there's a good chance that people will just be like, meh, I'll watch something else.
Do you think that could have had anything to do with the success of Breaking Bad? Because, in the first few minutes, you got what everyone wanted, which was Bryan Cranston in his undies.
Yes.
And so they show like that exciting moment.
Yes.
And then they, 2 weeks earlier or whatever.
I know a lot of people complain about starting with action and then going to 2 weeks earlier. They made a joke about it on Rick and Morty, and I feel like that has stuck in people's minds. It's certainly stuck in mine. But there's a reason that people do that, and there's even more reason now.
Yeah.
You have no time. And there are also plenty of examples of, Citizen Kane. There are plenty of classic examples of starting at the end or in the middle or in action and then going back. So it's not a no-no. It's not even a pet peeve for me. I understand it is for some people. No,
because it kind of irritates me.
It does?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's sometimes, I feel like in the past it was used for evil rather than good.
Yeah. Well, I do understand why it's necessary.
Yeah.
And like with Netflix, they know exactly when people turn things off.
Yeah.
And change the channel.
Yeah.
Switch to another show.
Yeah.
They know, so they have the hard data on what works.
Yes, they will give you very specific numbers for exactly what second chunks of people turned off your program.
Yes.
They will give you this in excruciating detail.
Yeah.
So we know we have to grab people early on.
Yes. And that's an easy way to do it. They did it in Pitch Perfect 3.
Yeah.
It's like the big climax. Just start with it. And did that originally come out in the theater?
Yes. I think Pitch Perfect 3.
Did they have problems with people walking out during Pitch Perfect 2?
No, I feel like the reason for doing it in Pitch Perfect 3 was that the movie was a departure from the previous movies in that it incorporated that action element. It wasn't a massive part of the movie, but it was sort of the third act of the movie, so it made sense to let people know right up front this is going to be a little bit different. Also,
I think Rebel Wilson maybe got a little more popular in the meantime.
Yeah.
I really like the Pitch Perfect movies, but this is why we're talking about Pitch Perfect.
Yeah. But yeah, it was, it's to me it seemed like it made sense to just sort of like drop that bit of info right at the beginning. We're sort of going to do Die Hard.
Yeah.
And then, most of the movie is not that, but it is a significant part of the movie.
It was fun.
Yeah. But, it affects structure because, generally people talk about, for features, generally people talk about a 3-act structure.
Yes.
For a 22-minute cartoon, people are still talking about a 3-act structure.
Right.
And, there are people who advocate for calling it a 5-act structure or a 4-act structure. I think we sometimes lean a little bit toward 4 in that typically, if something is feature length, we like to have the first act be a little on the short side, third act be a little on the short side, and then the second act, which is often referred to as the fun and games part of the movie.
Yes.
The second act be a bit longer.
And I think that really depends on the type of movie. Like if it is a comedy, like where the whole movie is about fun and games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the fun and games is the point of the movie.
Yes.
Make the second act really long.
Yeah.
I hate it when you show up for the fun and games and then it's what's promised to you is a little tiny part of it. And it's like, no.
One of the big challenges in writing a feature is keeping the first act short because we always want to, like, writers love to make up backstory and love to create worlds, and then you wind up having to get all of this information across in the first act in order to get to the second act. And you can lose people that way.
You sure can.
Yeah. I've worked on numerous projects, as have you, where the struggle is getting the first act shorter.
Yeah.
And then, often we talk about a 4-act structure also because the second act typically has a big turning point in the middle of it, which sort of breaks it into 2 acts.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. We're all in school. We learned the essay structure, introduction, body, conclusion. It's kind of that. You're not repeating your information as you do in an essay, but you do need to, it has to start, and then stuff has to happen, and then it has to conclude. So there is a natural 3 parts to that.
Yeah.
Doing it in 2 would be weird. There definitely are movies that are 2 acts, and it can work, but 3 sort of feels like the minimum. It's just like the rule of 3 in jokes.
Right.
It's not arbitrary. The rule of 3 is there because you need at least 2 things to establish a pattern, and then the third thing breaks it. Often, it's really a rule of 4. Often you need 3 things to really set that pattern before you break it with a 4th thing, but the minimum is 3. Same is true for acts, I think.
Yeah.
And, apart from how important it is to get into whatever is interesting about your story very early now.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing that, when we read other people's scripts, when we have to rewrite something or we're giving someone notes, we're any situation where we're reading someone else's work, one of the things that is an interest killer is when it does not feel like the events are connected.
Right.
You can lose people very quickly. If it starts to feel like we're seeing a sequence of unconnected events, it's a huge turnoff for audiences.
And you used to get that a lot in movies that had women in them, but they were written by men. And you would just have women suddenly getting mad for no reason or suddenly crying for no, because women are these insane, mysterious creatures and no one can understand their unmotivated ways. And that's how women acted in movies. And it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Because it's just it's just baked in misogyny everywhere.
It's like in science fiction, people use science babble as a magic fix for any story problem.
Right.
In a fantasy movie, it's usually magic, not science magic, that fixes every problem.
Right.
But I feel like in movies that lack either of those, it used to be like your magic fix-it for any story problem was women are crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Like you would just, if you didn't have any connecting material,
right,
you would just introduce a woman.
It's like, okay, I don't have anything to motivate this next scene, so let's just have the dumb do something. Well, that's one shortcut.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, you see it all over the place.
Yeah.
Just like, why did that character just suddenly decide to do that?
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of, you'll be watching a movie and a character will suddenly get angry and you have no idea why they're angry, and then you go, oh, because this is the point in the movie where we needed them to break up.
Right.
Or this is the point in the movie where we needed her to leave.
Right.
Or this is the point where we needed him to quit his job.
We needed some kind of drama here.
And they didn't bother to motivate it.
Right, you got to go back and put in some motivation.
I mean, I feel like very often the reality is that it was motivated at some stage and something got cut.
I don't think that happens as often as you think it does.
No, but I think one of the things that happens is, and this is surprisingly a huge danger when you're writing, especially a feature because they're long. People put in things that explain what's going on and they cut them out, but they still remember them.
Oh, yeah.
It becomes surprisingly hard to remember what is actually still in the movie and what you just remember from earlier drafts. And we've seen that even in getting notes from executives. Sometimes they won't give notes on something because they're remembering the explanation from an earlier draft, and we'll catch it and be like, oh, wait, we cut that, so this doesn't make sense now. I mean, I'm not excusing these kind of mistakes, but it is surprisingly easy to do.
Yeah. Well, and you know what you know in your head, and then you forget what you actually conveyed.
I mean, one of the biggest challenge. This might be the biggest pointer of all in writing. Is the challenge is to forget everything you know about the story continually at every moment, so that you can understand what the audience knows about the story.
Right.
Because telling a story is all about doling out bits of information. That's how a story comes across, and you need to know what information the audience has, what information is memorable enough for it to stick in their heads, and how they're putting stuff together. You need to be the audience, and it's hard to do because you know all the stuff already. I mean, that's one of the reasons that it's more interesting to write a movie where you don't know how you're going to end it, because finding that ending is exciting in the way that watching an ending is exciting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, very often we like to do that. I mean, like outline it up to a point and then go, let's just start writing it.
Yeah, but I don't like to plan. I know that, especially, when you're working on a series and it's serialized, you have a point A and a point B you have to get to.
Yeah.
But I will do as little planning as possible, especially when I'm writing for myself, because that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
You start being surprised by what the characters do and say. And I love that. And outlining kills that.
Yeah. I mean, as I've said many times, I started off working in animation at Disney, which at the time had very detailed premises, super detailed outlines, and then by the time you got to the script, you had almost written it.
I understand why that's necessary
It's
because
fine.
the executives need to approve what's going to happen before you put in all the time and work of writing the final script. I understand it's important.
But usually, if I'm left to my own devices, and I know you typically agree with me on this, we will do a very short outline.
Oh, yeah,
We'll
very
do
simple.
like a 1 to 2 page premise and then just write the script. So we know basically what the story is, but we haven't sorted out details. Because it's more interesting and I think typically better in the end to work it out in that way. It's more spontaneous. It's more authentic. That's my opinion. I know people love outlining and they're not wrong.
No.
That's a way to do it. I just kind of prefer this. And the good thing is, the good news is, if you are discovering the story as you're going along, you're not performing it live.
Right.
You can go back later, once you've figured out what the story is, and fix the earlier stuff so that it all makes sense. I mean, one of the reasons that movies work at all, that storytelling of any kind of linear storytelling works, is because the person creating it can figure out what the exciting thing is at the end and then go back and fix the beginning stuff. And then when you're watching it, it's like magic.
Oh, yeah.
But it is easier to figure out what the payoff is and then go back and write in the setup than it is to write setup and hope that you'll find a place for the payoff.
Right.
And it does feel kind of magical when you're watching something and you're like, oh, that's the thing they set up before. They're paying it off now. That's so cool.
People love that.
Yeah, and like in your head, no, they just figured out a thing and then they went back and like stuck 3 words in earlier and then made it seem like magic. But like magic tricks don't have to be complicated.
No, but it's satisfying.
It is.
To see us see something and you're like, okay, that's going to pay off later.
Yeah.
And then when it pays off, you're like, ooh, it paid off.
And for me, it's all, I mean, very often when we're watching a movie, because we write movies and TV and we know what stuff is, very often something will happen in a movie and we'll be like, well, that's going to be important later. Like it's, they've put so much emphasis on it with the way the shot is framed or the way someone reacts to something.
They linger on it.
That we know it's going to be important later. But like for me, doesn't ever spoil the enjoyment of it.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But you know what's annoying is when they have a bunch of stuff like that and then it doesn't pay off later and you're like, why? It had nothing to do with anything. Why did they do that?
Okay, that's when you know something was cut.
Yeah.
When there's a very clear setup and then no payoff, it's like at some point there was a payoff to that. But it is interesting to see the ways that people can emphasize the setup information. I think when John Cleese was making Fawlty Towers, when they were writing it, he was like, one of the things I don't like about television comedy is that you can tell what is story setup because it's the part that's not funny. Someone says something that's not funny and you're like, well, I know that's going to be story stuff because they wouldn't have said it otherwise because it wasn't funny. So his goal with Fawlty Towers was always to make the thing that was a story point the funniest part. So you would be confident that was just in there because it was hilarious, and then when it paid off later, it would be
extra,
like that much sweeter. And it is a little bit more satisfying when something is in there, is memorable enough that you remember it when the payoff comes, but not so overt that you know it's a setup for something.
Right.
That is superior.
Boy, I haven't watched Fawlty Towers in a long time. I want to go back on.
Definitely need to rewatch.
I was surprised recently I heard how few episodes there were. I was
Yeah.
shocked.
Well, I mean, it was at the time. I mean, this is still often true, but where they would do a season of like 6 episodes,
Yeah.
and they would just do a couple of seasons and then move on. I can't remember how many there are, but it's not very many.
I need to go back and watch all of those because they were so good.
I think we may have mentioned before that one of our favorite shows is Garth Marenghi's Dark Place,
Yes.
which has only 6 episodes.
Yeah, which is also hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing about Faulty Towers that's worth noting is it's been remade twice.
One's with B. Arthur.
One with B. Arthur and one with John LaRoquette, I think.
Oh, I remember that
as
one.
American series, and neither one really quite worked. Mm-hmm. There is something, I don't know if it was John Cleese or if it was Breton, but there was something that never quite worked in the American versions.
Sometimes it's just the right time and place.
I mean,
we've talked about before.
It's possible. I mean, Faulty Towers also might not work in England now. I don't know if because there's a lot of stuff about class structure in there that I don't know if that's as deeply ingrained in people's day-to-day lives now as it once was. But certainly in the 70s, it was more ingrained in England than it was in the U.S. So the U.S. versions didn't quite seem to come together. But we digress. Something I learned in school, and I think people associate it now a lot with Trey Parker and Matt Stone from South Park, is the causality, the importance of causality in a story. Because they will often talk about how they'll write up a story, like write it up on the whiteboard, and if they find themselves putting "and" in between the story beats, they know there's a problem.
Right.
If they find themselves putting "but" or "so" or "therefore," then they know it's working. And that is very true.
You need the motivation.
Yeah. If you have, I mean, there are times when it is kind of "and then," but it's always got to tie together later. Sometimes it's not obvious what the connection is at the beginning, and sometimes you can lose an audience by not showing what that connection is early enough.
Right.
Like, I mean, every now and then we'll see something where they'll introduce a character, and we're like, okay, and then they introduce another character, and we're like, okay, and then they introduce a third and fourth character, and then none of them have come together yet, and like I'm in the kitchen getting a Coke Zero. I'm like, I've lost interest.
Yeah.
That will happen. Like, we need to see how they fit together fairly early on, or there needs to be some other aspect of it that is so engaging that it'll keep us in there. But one of the things that I find in writing is I am a big fan of reversals. Reversals are like, I want to get as many in there as I can. And those are the buts in causality. Those are the things where this is happening, but this comes along and messes everything up. And then they recover from that, but this other thing happens. So having those reversals where things are going well, then they're going badly, then they're going well, then they're going badly, is always very important to me. Because that's what gives the story like its texture, its structure. Like that's what makes it an EKG and not a flat line.
Right.
You know what
Where
I mean?
it's dead.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I will overdo it. Like, I'll see an opportunity. I'm like, we'll get to the end of a scene, and I'm like, I just thought of a way this could go really wrong. It's like, at some point, you have to stop.
Yeah, you can only end the movie once.
Yeah. I mean, there was that, I feel like in the 80s or 90s, there was a period where every movie had to end like 12 times.
Right.
And it was like, enough already.
Right.
I mean, sometimes I love it. But, like, after a while, like when when you know you're watching a thriller or a horror film and the monster or villain dies, and you're just like, well, I know they're going to come back to life. They're going to pop up in the background. There's going to be scary, and then they're going to die again. Like, I know that's going to happen. It's become such a cliche that can get a little old. But then you have a movie like The Abyss, which I really liked, and I feel like that movie ends about 9 times, but like I was there for it.
Yeah, that was a good movie.
Yeah, it's quite a long movie, and it might be 7 acts. There's a lot going on, but I don't know. I like it. It definitely kept me going.
It broke some rules.
It definitely did.
And it worked out.
And it worked. Yeah,
because you don't have to follow the rules.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is like the whole importance of interconnectivity and causality is it's a rule, but you don't ever have to follow the rules.
Right.
And there are filmmakers who can make a movie where you get to the end of the movie and you still don't know how anything is connected to anything else, but you loved the movie.
Right.
And their names are David Lynch and nobody else.
Yep.
Kind of, basically.
Yeah, but he's breaking the rules.
Yeah.
But he knows what the rules are.
He knows what the rules are. He is capable of following the rules.
Right,
he knows why those rules are there.
It's sort of like painting a crap picture because you can't paint.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, it's an abstract. It's like, no, it's not. You can't paint.
Yeah.
It's like that. But with writing, it's like, don't just, do it if you want to. People do. But, you can have no idea how to write and then write a bunch of gibberish and then be like, okay, here's my masterpiece.
Yeah.
And may or may not work. But if you know what the rules are and then choose not to follow them, it works better. You have a better chance of it working.
Basically, if you're going to break the rules, you have the option of being someone who knows why the rules are there, knows how to follow them, and chooses to break them, or being someone who has absolutely no idea what they're doing and blunders their way into something entertaining.
And that can work.
There are many of our favorite movies.
Oh, yeah.
Are terrible.
Yeah.
And they are interesting and surprising, largely because the filmmakers did not know what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it comes together in a way that is so involving and charming for some reason.
Right.
That I could watch Fateful Findings
yeah.
probably once or maybe twice a week for the rest of my life and be into it every single time.
Yeah.
And it's not like, I don't think Neil Breen knew what rules he was breaking. I think he knew he was breaking rules, but I don't think he knew what they were. And it's not like he's like this super engaging or likable character on screen. Nothing against him, but I just could watch that movie over and over again.
I don't think people have a really good grasp on how hard it all is, because there are so many factors involved. There's so many people involved.
Yes.
There's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many things that have to be just right, and you have to get all the nuances. It's a lot of work, and it's just sometimes stuff just doesn't hit right. So the fact if someone completes a crap movie, that's impressive.
Yes.
It really is.
The fact that they finished.
Yeah.
I think, I say this a lot, but I think it was Conan O'Brien who said it takes a whole lot of very talented people working super hard to make a terrible movie.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like the people making it were probably very smart, super talented people, and it just did not come together.
Sometimes they don't come together.
The corollary to that is, and I think I've said this before on the podcast, no matter how bad something is, it's somebody's favorite movie or TV show.
Yeah.
It means something to someone.
I have a bunch of movies that are just, like, I have to tell people what they are.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite movies is Eric the Viking.
Yes.
Which was done by many of the Monty Python men.
Yes.
And it's Terry Jones, one of my all-time favorites, because he can just kill me with an expression.
Yeah.
Just his eyes moving across the screen will just kill me.
Yes.
And I could watch Eric the Viking over and over. And I have to tell people about it.
Yeah.
Also, the director's son's cut or whatever it was that came out is the only one I can find.
Yeah.
And they messed the movie up with that cut. It is not the original movie.
If anyone has access to the original cut of Eric the Viking,
guess what?
Let us know.
I have it.
What?
Yeah. Shh.
Okay.
But it's not available anywhere.
Yeah.
So But yeah, sometimes like the director's cut can come on or whatever future cut, somebody's cut. That can okay. I saw the director's cut of Blade Runner first in the theater in like the early 90s.
Yeah.
Before I ever saw the original Blade Runner.
Yes.
So that's the one I fixated on.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like, which one is better. But I think the director's cut is better.
And I think almost everyone would agree with that.
Yeah.
I saw the director's cut very late. Like it had been available for a long time, and I had like read about it, and I knew generally what the differences were. But I mean, I think it's a significantly better story. For among other things, like the voiceover in the original release did not add to the movie. It was destructive to the movie. So just taking that out for me was a huge improvement. And I think that I think they underestimated the intelligence of the audience, which is I don't know. That's a bad way to go. If you're like, I think we need to explain this movie after the fact to the audience, just don't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, either you're wrong about what the audience is, or you're wrong about why you made the movie in the first place.
Was that probably an executive note?
Probably. I
mean, a lot of times when stuff like that happens, you're like, somebody got a note.
Yeah. Well, I mean, famously, there was that recut of Brazil that they tried to release because they felt that the movie was too weird and confusing. So they made a much more confusing edit of it, which I've seen. I mean, it's rough, but it's baffling. Like they cut out things that made the movie just really make no sense.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's very odd. And it wasn't. Not only was it not released, it wasn't really finished. Like, it's not clear that they were actually going to release that cut because there was like reshooting that needed to be done. But I mean, Terry Gilliam won in the end, and his cut was released. There's a European edit and a U.S. edit, but it's better. I mean, it's a lot better.
Well, I think my point is, let things be imperfect.
Yeah.
Because if you try to fix them and make them perfect, then they're not going to be what they are anymore. Like, if you went through and you're like, okay, I'm going to fix David Lynch's movie and make it all make sense, then you've ruined it.
There's a line, there was a sitcom called Andy Richter Controls the Universe.
I remember that show.
And there was a line in there, or a couple of lines in there that I always remember, where they were defacing someone's office by throwing fertilizer about. And one of the characters was throwing the fertilizer up in the air and letting it rain down on her head. And someone else was like, don't you know what fertilizer is? And she was like, well, obviously they clean it before you buy it. And he says, it's fertilizer. If they cleaned it, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
If you tried to make a David Lynch movie structurally perfect, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
The movie would disappear.
Also, like, okay, so you can say, all right, this is a perfectly executed movie.
Yeah.
They're not always all that good. I mean, they're not that interesting to watch. Sometimes it's fun to watch the variations on what the agreed upon perfect structure is. Yeah.
I mean, famously, Wes Anderson movies, often you'll watch the whole movie and not really know what the main character ever wanted, which is one of the most basic rules of storytelling. And yet, I think he makes it work. And even the people who are the most vociferous advocates for this sort of perfect 3-act structure, I think will generally admit you can make a perfectly structured terrible movie, and you can make a bewilderingly structured great movie.
Right.
So it's just, this is where we get into the concept of the low percentage choice.
Right.
It's never the wrong choice to break a rule. It just might be a low percentage choice, where a low percentage of the time you are going to get a positive result from that. And it's something that I learned in improv, because improv is something that has a lot of quote-unquote rules. And the most famous rule is the yes and rule, where you never contradict a new piece of information, you add to it. Mm-hmm. And it's because you're building a brick wall, and you can't lay down the top bricks before you lay down the bottom bricks. You have to build on what's already there. And if you start saying no to stuff, then you're just pulling those bricks out, and you're never getting anywhere. However, I have seen fantastic scenes where people no-butted the heck out of it. They did not yes and, they did not follow the most basic rule, and it was a wonderful scene. Mm-hmm. It can happen. It's just a low percentage choice. Yes. It's not going to happen most of the time. So it's never like you can't break that rule. It's not even like you shouldn't break that rule. It's sort of like, if you want people to like this, you should know how to execute that rule properly.
And one of the ways of executing that properly is at least knowing what the rules are.
Yes.
But knowing what's expected.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that's happened is audiences have gotten less tolerant of sort of meandering in stories. Mm-hmm. Like, we expect things to be very tightly interconnected now.
Yeah.
And that is what it is. I mean, a lot of people find it difficult to appreciate older movies now because they're used to this more sort of tight causal structure that we have now.
Not the old meandering movie with the woman who you have no idea what she's thinking because she's crazy.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of, we recently saw a movie where we felt that they misinterpreted the concept of show, don't tell, which is something people always say about movies and TV shows, that you should, whenever possible, show the information that the audience needs. Don't just have someone say it.
Right.
And we were watching this movie and basically didn't know what was going on for much of the movie, and it was like, it seemed like they were trying to do show, don't tell, but they weren't really showing us. And then they were talking a lot.
Right, but not conveying information.
It
was just blah, blah.
Yeah, and there used to be more of that in movies where people would talk, and it was just sort of atmospheric, and it was like sort of general character building, but not really getting to the point. And people are less tolerant of that now.
Yeah. And you have a little more room for the meandering stuff in a movie. Like, you can do that a little. But in writing for a series, like an animated series, you don't have time for any of that. Oh my gosh, if I could explain how much of my scripts get cut by me before, like, after the first draft, it's like, okay, I have to go through and cut out all of this stuff I love. Because first of all, it's supposed to be only 22 minutes long, and it's a 50-page script. But you don't have time to sort of gently stroll into the scene.
Yeah.
And you have to get to the point. And like, if you have a back and forth conversation with the two characters, you have to, okay, what is the essence of this? And I need to cut this down to 2 words instead of 2 pages.
Yeah.
And you have to do that.
I mean, a practical consideration in animation scripts, this is kind of an important thing. If I'm writing an animation script, if I have 4 lines of dialogue in a row that have no description in between them, I start to get uncomfortable. It's not like you can't do it, and definitely there are places where there's like rapid fire exchanges that go on much longer than that. But generally, if you have 4 lines that are a sentence or 2 long and there hasn't been any description, you're probably talking too much.
Yeah.
It's not a rule, but it's just something where, like, I feel like it's kind of important to start to have that feeling of discomfort.
Right.
And you get too much dialogue without description.
And I mean, you've been doing this long enough. Your instincts are, I've always seen them be correct.
Yeah.
Because you know after all this time.
Well, they're not always correct, but they
are often correct.
They're often correct.
They're correct unless you're correcting me.
Well, I mean, it's here's something that basically never happens. I never look at something and go, these people aren't talking enough.
Right.
There should be more talking and less doing things.
Right.
It's
well,
not...
and that's the other thing is you can't have the characters just stop with their arms hanging at their sides and have a conversation. The conversation needs to happen while something is going on.
Yeah. I mean,
you got to kill two birds.
Yeah. One of the most practical uses of the show don't tell aphorism is that thing where you're writing a script and someone has like a new thing, a new ability, a new vehicle, a new weapon, a new toy, something, and you want to stop to explain how the thing works. Mm-hmm. Don't do it. I know it doesn't make sense because you would, if you were giving, like, here's the gun, mm-hmm. you would explain to them how the gun worked.
Right.
But we need to see that, like, they get this new thing, they need training with it, but there's no time for training because some emergency happens and they have to go for it.
They have to figure it out on the fly.
Have to figure it out while you're doing it because it is so much more involving.
Unless it's an old James Bond film and then they explain everything and you're like, well, I wonder when they're going to use that.
That was a little heavy-handed mm-hmm. at the time. But I mean, I loved it. I grew up with James Bond movies. I loved the sequences with... Was that Q or M? Oh my gosh, I don't remember.
I think it was Q.
Was Q
I don't know. I don't really care for James Bond.
I know you don't, and I have not been following the franchise recently as much. But I did love that when I was a kid. Yeah. And there's something about just being totally on the money, going, here's the giant magnet. Yeah. See ya. Yeah. That's going to come in.
I have enjoyed that in parodies of James Bond, like watching Naked Gun or whatever. But I find James Bond films usually insufferable.
One of my favorite lines I ever wrote, I think, was in an Earthworm Jim, and it was a parody of the James Bond strapped down with a laser mm-hmm. approaching him, and he says, "Do you expect me to talk?" And the villain says, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." We did that with Earthworm Jim, and he said, "Do you expect me to talk?" And the villain said, "Yes, I expect you to go, ah!" I always liked that.
Well, with a worm,
it was a little weird because he was a worm in a super suit. I mean, mm-hmm. theoretically, you could have chopped the suit in half and he could have just crawled away.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We didn't play it that way.
No.
He escaped. He didn't die. That wasn't the end of the series.
Okay. That's good to know.
Anyway, so we've sort of meandered in a fairly unstructured way around the idea of structure. Our writing.
No. Well, I just want to say that I think that there are a lot of really good and great writers out there who are probably struggling with being perfect and like, oh, I've got to get this just right. I've got to follow these rules. And I just want to encourage people to write.
Yes.
Because that perfectionism is a killer. It is so much better to finish an imperfect script than it is to have a perfect script in your head and then never write it.
This is an ongoing theme in our lives and in this podcast mm-hmm. of fighting against perfectionism.
Yeah, because that's a rough one.
Because there are two things to bring back from earlier in this very podcast. One, the most impressive thing is just to finish something.
Yeah.
Because, for every finished script out there must be 800 unfinished scripts.
And that's just on my hard drive.
Most things don't get finished.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, it's important to remember that it's not going out live.
Right.
I cannot emphasize that enough. It's not improv. It's not happening live on stage. Mm-hmm. You have the opportunity to go back and fix stuff. As you often say about the sandbox.
Oh, no, I read that from Jordan Peele.
Okay, but you do say it.
But yeah, I do say it. You have to put the sand in the sandbox, which is the first draft. And then the second draft is coming back and turning the sand into sandcastles. But if you don't put the sand in the sandbox, it's never going to happen.
Yes. And that is, I mean, that is why they say that writing is rewriting.
Mm-hmm. Again and again.
Yes.
And then you have somebody read it, and then you rewrite it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing about perfectionism is that I feel like most people have had this experience where they wrote something and then they didn't get around to rewriting it for quite a while, mm-hmm. and came back and read it later expecting that it was going to be kind of awful, and you're like, hey, this is pretty good. Yeah. This is not as bad as I thought. Mm-hmm. Like, my perfectionism was wrong. Right. There are not as many problems here. And also, like, sometimes you come back, you've given it even a few days, and you're like, oh, well, I can totally see how to fix this now. Right.
Sometimes the reverse is true.
Sometimes the reverse is true. So, no, sometimes, I mean, I remember, like, one of the first plays I wrote, somewhere in the middle of the play, I thought I had a fantastic idea, and it was probably at 4 a.m. Mm-hmm. And I wrote the whole second half of the play and, like, read it the next day, and I was like, oh my God. And I literally had, and this is when I was writing on a typewriter, I literally had to throw out all these typewritten pages and just go back to, like, page 12 and start again from there. Oh, no. And then it still wasn't that great. But it was better. Mm-hmm. It was better.
But you finished it, and that's the important part.
Yeah. Just finish something. Yes. Come on.
Just write it.
And then rewrite it.
Mm-hmm. And then rewrite it again.
Don't be afraid of rewriting. I mean, don't be afraid to put stuff down on paper. Don't be afraid to make a first draft of something, whether it's a script or a painting or a sculpture, whatever. And then come back and noodle it later.
Here's the other thing. Sometimes when you write something really good, then you think you can't possibly cut it because, I can't cut that. That's really good. Yeah. Cut it. Yeah. You are going to cut a lot of good stuff. Yeah. You are.
And this is probably not a great thing to say, but, like, you're going to write something you love and you're going to cut it, and then years later you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I had that bit with the dump truck. Mm-hmm. I can use that here. Right. It's not necessarily dead. It might come back as some sort of gag sequence zombie.
Yeah, but it's so much better to cut it than have something not work in a scene. Yeah. It's just,
because and then it winds up, like, distorting everything around it like a black hole. No, it's like, got this one thing I can't change, so everything around it needs to be horribly distorted into a grotesque version of what it should be. Yeah. To make it fit.
No, you can, when you're watching a movie, you can tell, they didn't want to cut that, but they should have.
I feel like a lot of 80s movies that I loved in the 80s and still am fond of. Like, I watch them now and I'm like, oh my God, they had that set piece they desperately wanted to do. Mm-hmm. They urgently had to do that one action piece, and they, like, bent the whole second act around trying to get that to work, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. Like, some 80s movies are just sequences of set pieces that someone really wanted to do. Yeah. Yeah. But one of the important things is figuring out how to end a story.
Or how to end a podcast.
You read my mind.
Oh, did I step on your...
No, you didn't step on. I gave you a setup, and you finished it off.
All right. Well, I was just thinking that I need to take a nap because I'm going to be out past 10 tonight.
Yes.
So...
we're going to see Max Sabbath tonight.
And P-Lander Z. And I might have to stay out of the mosh pit because I dropped my iPad on my bare foot a little bit ago.
We're going to have to find your sturdiest boots.
It landed skinny side down on the bony part of my foot. And, oh my God, it hurts so bad.
I could hear it from downstairs.
Yeah. So, did you hear the thud or did you hear my cursing?
I heard both.
Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's going to...
I thought you had knocked over a bookcase. That's how loud the thud was.
It really hurts. Yeah. So
let's wrap it up.
Wrap it up so I can take my nap.
And then go see Max Sabbath.
I know.
Look up Max Sabbath. We're not going to explain.
Yeah.
You need to know. You need to find out about Max Sabbath on your own.
And this is their 10-year anniversary.
Oh, yeah. It's the big tour. Also, P-Lander Z is great. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So our Instagram is Doug and Candie Langdale. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm just looking at you. Yeah, with underscores, and but if you typed our names in, we would just show up.
You would probably find it.
Yeah.
Anyway, Candie is Candie.
So yeah.
So give us a shout.
And if you have questions or interesting comments,
yes,
I don't want to encourage too much. Look us up.
Yep.
And we are on
just about every
platform I can think of.
I guess if people are hearing this, they've already found us. So.
Oh yeah. Magical that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.